Good morning, members of City Council. Mike Schmidt, Assistant City Attorney, on Agenda Item 82 to provide a staff report. We have had, since the workshop on this and coming back today, we have had numerous meetings, as some were referenced in the public comment. We have taken input from the community as well as several organizations that have provided support in drafting this ordinance. Yesterday, I provided a memo to City Council with a summary of the ordinance, along with some additional supporting documentation for the ordinance. City Council has asked staff to come back and report on 4 specific things for today. Part A was to prepare a draft ordinance, which we have done and presented to City Council. Part B was to discuss with Polaris, which Polaris was here, and we have been working with Polaris, so I believe we've also already discussed Part B of the staff report. Part C was to meet with the Chief Judge with regardings of a diversion court that might be created. And Dottie Skipper, who's been here today, also actually did that portion of the report. So I've been in coordination with her. She'd been in coordination with the Chief Judge. I could tell you that she has met with the Chief Judge. They have had discussions about this, and it is being looked into and worked on. And if you would like to have her give you more details, she's here and can provide additional information. But she has, in fact, reached out to the Chief Judge and had meetings, and they are still working on the idea of the diversion court. With regards to Part D, the enforcement mechanisms, the ordinance is drafted so that there's multiple enforcement mechanisms. There is obviously the administrative enforcement mechanisms that this is going to be administered by the PDD, Planning and Development Department. And I'm working with Kathy Coyle, and we are still currently making sure that we have all the permitting process in place. But this would be, application would be applied for through the PDD. It would then be sent to the police department if it is sufficient, if it's fully completed and meets with the ordinance requirements. The police department would then run a background check on the applicant, as well as for the bathhouse would run a background check on the bathhouse, any bathhouse technicians, any employees. They have to designate a bathhouse manager. The bathhouse manager would also have to have a background check run. Once the background checks are completed, the police department would schedule a time and a meeting to go out to the bathhouse, do an inspection. They then would return a report back to the PDD. The PDD would look it over and notify the applicant of the final approval, presuming it met all the qualifications. The applicant would then come in and receive the permit upon a final payment of the permit fee. So Kathy Coyle is also here today. She can answer any questions with regards to the PDD, but I do think we're going to need to come back with a fee resolution in addition to this ordinance. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Swartz.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, first of all, thanks for putting so much time and effort into this. This is not an easy ordinance to try and change in order to reach a settlement from something that was 30 years ago and created to deal with what the realities are now concerning these places that have prostitution, human trafficking, and so on. So I appreciate you doing quite a lot of hard work in order to try and get this thing done. So thank you so much for that.
Yes.
I know that when we talked about the Chief Judge, and we can bring up Mrs. Skipper Grover in a minute, but the idea behind this particular part of the request was that once people are found to be in situations or maybe even arrested because they are part of their participants in prostitution or in because they are been illegally trafficked here to perform, in a sex or brothel house. I wanted to make sure that they had a place to go in order to get them out of that lifestyle. And I think that I saw Judge Figueroa on Saturday. He had mentioned that he was sort of working with us, but I knew that he had met with Dottie. So it's good to know that we're going in the right direction. A lot of these diversion courts are incredibly important to make sure that those crimes that are both have an element of redemption that's easier to find as opposed to hardened criminals. We have a way of doing this. I know that my colleague, Mr. Vieira, has been involved with the Veteran Treatment Court. We have other types of diversion courts, and I think this is high time that we started doing this. And thank you for meeting with TPD to talk about how we can make this a priority. I know that many of the people that are working in our investigative units, Criminal Investigation Bureau, understand how serious this problem is throughout the city, and that without these kind of significant rule changes, we're not going to get there. Now, the one thing that I want to talk to you about, because our friends from Polaris came here, and thank you very much for meeting with them. They are a great national group that is trying to solve the problem of human trafficking across the country, and we appreciate everything they had to say. One of the things that they mentioned, and I think you and I have talked about it, is making this a broader ordinance, maybe not this one, but we have, and if you could explain some of the difficulties of dealing with Chapter 6. I think it was Chapter 6 that you had mentioned that has some of the other ordinances that might deal with all other types of uses that are considered brothels or bathhouses, not bathhouses, but other types of sex workers are there. So could you explain what's going on with Chapter 6?
Well, Chapter 6 is our business regulation ordinance, and it provides for business regulation of different businesses, including things such as pain management clinics to adult use places. There's numerous different parts and divisions of Chapter 6 of business regulation. This would be part of Chapter 6. And the way Chapter 6 has been handled in the past, each division has sort of been its own piece, separated out from the other divisions a little bit. And one thing that legal is willing to explore and look into with City Council's guidance is whether we should go back into Chapter 6 to try to make it more global, so that instead of the separate little pieces, there's one entire administrative part of it, one entire definitions. Right now, every little piece of 6 has its own definitions unique to that division. So I think that is possibly one suggestion. And parts of what we are writing in this ordinance might apply to other sections of Division 6, maybe even to adult uses or other areas that City Council finds to be appropriate. Well, each one's going to have its own unique issues that we would need to explore.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I know that in some of our discussions it is a much bigger problem. This is only one piece of the whole enforcement mechanism dealing with these type of establishments, and we want to make sure that we aren't creating something that we can't handle, both in terms of enforcement but also legally. So concentrating on one portion of it, as you did, and I want to tell you, it was a brilliant idea to bring out an old ordinance and to change it in order to meet today's needs. Thank you so much for doing that, because I don't think any of us on this council knew about a bathhouse ordinance. I know that for us, even though it was there, we may not have enforced it in years and years and years. And having the foresight to get that ordinance and now taking it and changing it in order for it to meet our needs now, I thought was a great idea, Mr. Schmidt. So thanks for doing that. I know that our friends from Polaris had their issues with this, but I think they also know that this is just the beginning of how we might be able to deal with some of these other establishments out there. So thanks for doing that. So, Chair, I'm not going to have any other additional questions if anyone else wanted to, and if I could afterwards close it out.
Councilman Villar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to recognize something that touched me before during public comment were some of the victims, Ms. Fernandez and two other women who spoke. Just thank you for your courage. It was very, very touching. I mean that 100%. I also wanted to thank my colleague, Councilman Suarez, for bringing this up before us. We thank you for your leadership in that regard. And something that Councilman Suarez had indicated or referenced to was the Veterans Treatment Court, which I think can really serve as a basis or a good preface or inspiration for some sort of a judicial diversion program. That program has been wildly successful. It's one of the best in the country. It was recognized by then Attorney General Holder. It has about 75 mentors, men and women who are veterans, who take criminal defendants who have been led to an unfortunate path by PTSD-related incidents in their life due to their service, and they provide them with mentorship. I would love to see something like that happen for victims of sexual trafficking in our county. I see here today my friend Janae Urado with the Tampa Hispanic Bar Association, and I'm sure that we can help make something like that happen. And I also see this discussion really as part of the national dialogue. You read the newspaper any day these days, and you read about sexual assault. You read about sexual abuse. You read about powerful men victimizing women, making victims out of women. What was read before from internet sites is beyond shameful. And there's no difference between what you read about a lot in the news, politicians, people from Hollywood, whoever it may be, and what we read about there. It's about power, and it's about sexual abuse, and it's about victimizing women who can't defend themselves. So for me, this is part of the national dialogue on sexual abuse and sexual assault of women. And I just thank this body for taking up this issue. And thank you, Mr. Schmidt, for your hard work. Thank you.
Councilman Maniscalco.
I just want to thank Mr. Manson and Clean Up Kennedy and everybody else involved, and Mr. Douglas for bringing this up and getting the ball rolling on this conversation and this discussion. It's a modern-day slavery, is what it is, and it's happening in our backyard. Of course, we see, how Tampa has been hit with this significantly, and I'm glad that we're taking steps to combat this for a better future, for our youth and our children, and any potential future victims to get rid of this. This is 2017. We don't need this in our communities. And moving forward as a city, and what we can do legally, in the discussion and the things have been said, is extremely important. We are making progress today, and I thank all of you for making this happen and all your hard work.
Before we go back to Councilman Suarez, I wanted to know if I could ask Ms. Groover Skipper a question about your conversations with the Chief Judge about a diversion program, just so I can understand exactly what it is that is being contemplated or what is being discussed.
Well, yes, it was a very wonderful meeting that Judge Vicarota welcomed myself, and Attorney Janae Urado accompanied me to that meeting, along with briefings from another incredible attorney, Brent Woody, who does amazing work with human trafficking and human trafficking victims and survivors. The judge was extremely open and willing to look into implementing such a court. He and the public offender, Juliet Holt, had meetings with her as well. She is all for it. Our next step would be to meet with other key stakeholders, and Andrew Warren is one of those, and he has all the information that we provided to him, and he let me know today his next steps. He'd be in touch with us soon to determine what those next steps might be. But the reason why we wanted to do this years ago, but the right leadership wasn't in place at the time, but now it's a perfect time between our new state attorney, our new sheriff, a lot of key people that are in favor of doing this particular type of diversion court.
What would the diversion do? What would actually happen?
When establishments, our concern was when establishments might shut down, that currently we have no safety net for the precious victims that are, so they go further underground or pop up somewhere else. So this would be an opportunity to be a pre-trial diversion court where they would go before the judge and have an option to go to programs such as Created, who is here with us today, to get learn the life skills, to just, a comprehensive wholeness program that could help bring them toward restoration.
So to be clear, we're not talking about diverting the male perpetrators of the crime.
Absolutely
We're talking
not.
about diverting the victims.
Absolutely.
Because my concern was I didn't want to see this morphing into something that somehow viewed the perpetrators as not doing something that deserved criminal sanction.
Correct. In fact, with the Chief Judge and with all the other stakeholders, we're also talking about implementation of a John School for men or women who are the perpetrators, and that they would have to go to an educational program to learn about the reality of the sex trade industry, and probably taught by some of our precious survivors that are here in today, so they would understand the reality of what they're doing, on top of any sanctions that they might have. That would be part of it. And this John School would be self-sustaining, because the Johns would have to pay a fee to attend the class. So it wouldn't cost much, it would be, it might to the men or the women, but for our administrative purposes, it would be self-sustaining. And there has been shown great success of these types of programs across the country.
Well, thank you for that clarification, because I think it's really important to understand that we're talking about these types of sanctions in addition to criminal penalties.
Correct.
And that just leads me to say that I think this has been a great conversation, and one of the things that has been so heartening is that it seems like there's some anecdotal evidence that there's actually some establishments that have closed in the last few months, and that means that this public campaign is really effective and having its desired effect.
Correct, although they pop up in different places. And that's one thing in talking to legal. Our concern, too, was there needs to be a more comprehensive ordinance, and it's already been addressed, because I know Created, with all of their expertise, has suggested that perhaps now we'll start seeing more modeling studios or more lingerie shops that are fronts for brothels as well. When the ordinance that would only pertain to bathhouses might really regulate more the bathhouses, but we're going to start seeing modeling studios, lingerie shops, which are fronts for brothels, pop up everywhere else. So having a broader ordinance to address everything under one ordinance would be, in my estimation, a very prudent way for the council to proceed.
So it will be our job to figure that out over the next few months.
And
Thank you.
we have a whole army
Chair.
here to help you do that, so thank you.
Okay, Councilman, anyone else wish to address?
Mr. Schmidt, did you want to address the issue of the background material and the like? Is it your desire to have that submitted to the record?
Yes, exactly. I would ask that be placed in the record, the memorandum along with the supporting documents.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair?
Yes, Councilman Suarez.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Mike, thank you so much for your work on this. Thank you to all the groups that are here, the cleanup, Kennedy, Polaris, Dottie. All of you have been a big part and incredibly important to trying to end this evil in our city. It's extremely difficult for us to continually fight against this without some tools in our toolbox. This is just one tool. And you've mentioned it, and I think everyone knows this, that there is a way that they will slip out of these types of ordinances, but that's why we have to keep being vigilant to make sure that as it comes up, that we squash it down again. We may not be able to eliminate all prostitution. I think there's a reason why they call it the oldest profession. By the way, politics is the second oldest profession. And so we understand that. Yeah. So we understand that we might have to come back and tweak it and revisit it and keep doing it. But I think that this council, I think that this administration will more than welcome the kind of vigilance that we're going to need to have in order to make sure that this is eliminated to a great degree. Thanks for the courage of the women that came up today. And it's funny, we started talking about this well before all the sexual harassment issues came up publicly. And I find it ironic that we are now in December and everything that has come up over the last month and a half concerning sexual harassment, sexual predators, those people that believe that power is the way to control people in a sexual manner, that it pervades our country, and it pervades a lot of places, and not just places like massage parlors or spas. And for us, I think that this is just one small way to try and fight that kind of evil that exists in our society. So I would like to move that we bring back the ordinance on a first read at 10:30, so that we can have public comment after or before we read the thing. This will make it, I think, easier for those folks that don't have to sit through an entire session. They can come during the first 10:30 certain hearing. So make it a little bit easier for those folks to make their schedule to come on over here. That would be on December 21st at 10:30 a.m. Thank you for mentioning that.
You looked at December 21.
I believe it's December 21 is our last regular
Yeah,
session
for this time, but
yeah.
did you look at that schedule?
I did.
Okay.
I know. I think
that's
that
our last regular.
I know that, and
understand.
I apologize, Chair. I just think that we have worked on this for so long. Mr. Schmidt has had a lot of work in this, and this has been on for, I think, about 4 or 6 months. I'm trying to remember the time date that we started doing this. It's been a long time, so I think it's just finally let's start this process before the
New
beginning
Year,
of the
or
year.
how about with the New Year?
And well, it'll be
Which would
second read for the new year.
Second read would be the New Year.
Yeah, the second read will
Yes.
start out 2018 in
Yeah,
the right way.
that's-
So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilman Swartz, a second by Councilman Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We have a first reading or an ordinance coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We already did item 83, so we are, any information reports and new business, we'll start with Councilman Vieira. Councilman